Chapter 11. Abdul Muizz Muhammad, servant of the bestower of might. Many generations had passed since Abdul Basit and his family had moved back to Medina. His descendants had continued the tradition of Islamic scholarship and were highly sought after for their knowledge and advice. One day, news reached Medina that the people of Hanafiya had left the fold of Islam and were indulging in all kinds of vices, with no regard to their traditions. There was rampant injustice and oppression. The Muhammad family gathered together and after consultation decided that one of the younger members should go to Hanafiya and investigate the situation and, if possible, bring them back to Islam. Abdul Muizz Muhammad, still a young man, only 21 years old, volunteered to go. He decided to approach the city as a merchant before deciding how he would tailor his message to the people. He set out for Hanafiya with a couple of camels loaded with goods such as perfumes, incense, dates, prayer mats of the finest quality, and books on Islam. When he reached Hanafiya, he found the city very different from what had been described to him by his ancestors. Everywhere he looked, there were rich houses and busy marketplaces selling all kinds of goods, some of them prohibited in Islam. He was horrified to see the people, especially the women, were so scantily dressed. How shameless the population had become. When he stopped in at places that looked like a masjid, he found many of them had either been abandoned or converted into stores selling alcohol and other prohibited items. He wandered around and in a poorer part of the city found a masjid that seemed to be empty. As he entered its grounds, he saw two people playing checkers and a third person watching and drinking tea. It was getting time for Maghrib Salat, and Abdul Muizz walked over to these individuals and asked, "Is there an imam in this place?" One of the checker players raised his hand and said, "Yes, I am the imam." Abdul Muizz asked, "When is the Maghrib Salat?" And the imam flippantly replied, "I don't know." Abdul Muizz was taken aback. He said, "If you are the imam, don't you lead the prayers?" The imam replied, "Nobody comes here to pray, and nobody has come to the masjid for a very long time. I just stay here because there is a trust for this building, and they pay me to take care of it. And so, I guess I am the imam." Abdul Muizz was very disappointed. He left the place and walked into the masjid. What he found inside was even more horrid. The masjid was in disrepair. Parts of the ceiling were falling down. The carpets were filthy. There were animal droppings everywhere. Looking around, he could not find even a small, clean area to say his salat. Abdul Muizz went out and cleared an area under a tree by the side of the masjid. He spread his prayer mat and said his prayers. That night he decided to stay there under the tree in a far corner of the grounds. He settled down with his camels, ate some bread, and watched in horror as people came into the courtyard, set up tables for games of chance and gambling. The so-called imam would charge a fee for each table that was set up and pocket it. The crowd increased and became boisterous, rowdy, and drunk. It was late in the night before everyone left. Abdul Muizz said Isha Salat, lay down on his prayer mat and tried to sleep. He realized that no direct approach talking about Islam was going to work with these people. Starting the next day, Abdul Muizz decided to clean the masjid. In the morning, several street cleaners came in to clear the courtyard of the mess from the previous evening partying. Abdul Muizz hired some of them to help with the cleanup inside the masjid. In the evenings, he closed the doors of the masjid, denying access to the imam and his friends. By the seventh day, the masjid was reasonably clean, and so, at Fajr, Abdul Muizz climbed the stairs to the top of the Muezzin's tower, and in his beautiful voice made adhan. Except for one sweeper, no one came. Abdul Muizz said his Fajr, and baked some bread which he shared with the sweeper who came for Fajr. The smell of the fresh bread attracted some of the other sweepers to come and watch him. He immediately offered them some bread, and asked them to come sit with him on the patio while they ate. They were hesitant at first, but decided to join him at his urging and ate with him. The sweepers were so taken with how sweet the bread was that they exclaimed they had never tasted anything better. The next day, the sweepers brought some of their friends and watched Abdul Muizz say his prayers before bringing the bread out to share with them. His fame started to spread, and soon people from other parts of the city heard about this sweet bread and wanted some as well. Abdul Muizz bought the bakery next door and started making a lot more of the bread, which he would sell only for a half hour after his daily salat. Crowds would gather on hearing his adhan. They would observe him performing his salat while they waited for an opportunity to buy his bread. Other bakers in town started to complain to the ruler. He asked them, "What is so special about this bread?" The bakers replied that the people say it is the sweetest bread they have had. The ruler sent some of his people to get the bread. The first day, the servants were unable to get any bread because it was all gone by the time they got to the bakery. The same thing happened on the second day and the third. By then, the ruler was very angry. He decided to go himself and arrived at the bakery and was told that Abdul Muizz was in the masjid for his afternoon prayer. The ruler marched into the masjid and in a loud voice ordered Abdul Muizz to open the bakery immediately. Abdul Muizz was in the middle of his prayer and paid him no attention. The ruler stood waiting for Abdul Muizz under the hot sun, getting angrier and angrier until Abdul Muizz finished his prayer. Abdul Muizz then opened the bakery and first served the people who had been in line, and the last loaf he gave to the ruler. The ruler, though upset, wanted to get out of the heat and back to his comfortable palace. At dinner that evening, the bread was served to him. He ate the bread and found it so wonderful that he ate all of it without sharing it with others. Next day, he sent for Abdul Muizz and ordered him to share the recipe with his baker. Abdul Muizz said he would be happy to do that on condition that the ruler answered a puzzle correctly. The ruler had always thought himself to be very smart, especially at these kinds of puzzles. He readily agreed to the condition. Abdul Muizz said, "Two friends while traveling sat down to have a meal together. One had 3 loaves of bread, and the other had 5. A third traveler was passing by, and the two requested him to join them to share their meal. They cut the loaves of bread into 3 equal parts, and each ate equal number of parts. The third traveler thanked the other 2 and left 8 dirhams for them before he went away. On receiving the money, the 2 friends started quarreling as to how much of the money each should receive. The man with 5 loaves demanded that he get 5 dirhams. The man who had contributed 3 loaves demanded that the money be split equally. They brought the dispute to Hadrat Ali, the 4th of the rightly guided caliphs of Islam. The ruler thought and didn't see this as any trick question. So he said the man with 5 loaves should get 5 dirhams, and the man with 3 loaves should get 3 dirhams. Abdul Muizz said that was not Hadrat Ali's decision. He decided that the man with 3 loaves gets only 1 dirham, and the one with 5 loaves gets 7 dirhams. The king became angry and demanded that Abdul Muizz have a good explanation or face punishment. Abdul Muizz explained that if each loaf was broken in 3 parts, you have 24 equal parts, and if each traveler ate 8 parts. The man with 3 loaves only contributed 1 part to the third traveler, while the man with 5 loaves contributed 7 parts. Therefore, he deserves 7 dirhams. Even though you did not have the correct answer, I will be happy to share my recipe with your baker, said Abdul Muizz. The people were delighted to see the oppressive king brought low. Abdul Muizz's fame spread among the people, and more of them started to come to the masjid to hear Abdul Muizz telling stories and posing challenging questions. People started to join him during his salat and were intrigued to learn about Islam. The next day, the baker presented his bread to the ruler. The bread didn't taste anything like the bread that Abdul Muizz had baked. The ruler sent for Abdul Muizz again. "What have you left out of the recipe that the bread does not taste anything like yours?" asked the ruler. "Let me tell you a story," said Abdul Muizz. "There was a renowned sheikh of Islam, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, may Allah be pleased with him, who was traveling to Sham, Syria. On the way it was getting dark and he was very tired. He found a masjid and went in, said his salat, and decided to stay there for the night. He found a darkened area and lay down and went to sleep. Soon, however, he was woken up by a big man who was the guard for the masjid and told to get out, for he was going to lock the masjid for the night. Imam Ahmad did not tell him that he was the famous Imam of the Muslims, but told him he was very tired, a traveler, and had nowhere to go. The guard was having none of that, and told him to get out. Imam Ahmad went out to the steps of the masjid, and thought he might sleep on the steps, but the guard came and dragged him out to the middle of the street and dumped him there. A baker opposite the masjid saw what was happening to the poor man. It was late at night, and feeling sorry for him, came out and invited Imam Ahmad to come with him, and he could sleep in his shop while he worked. Imam Ahmad was very grateful, and the baker spread a nice clean carpet for him to sleep on. Imam Ahmad lay down and watched the baker move around performing his tasks, bringing the flour, making the dough, cutting it, and then baking it. All the time he performed his tasks, he was repeating the tasbih, Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar. All glory is to Allah, all praise is to Allah. There is no God but the one God, and God is great. Imam Ahmad was watching the baker the whole time instead of sleeping. The next morning he asked the baker, "How long have you been doing the tasbih while you baked?" The baker replied, "All my life. This is what I do. Doesn't everyone?" Imam Ahmad was very impressed. He asked, "How has Allah rewarded you for your devotion?" The baker replied that, "Allah has given me everything I ever asked for." Then he thought for a minute and said, "Except for one thing." "What is that?" asked the Imam. "I have not been given the opportunity to meet Imam Ahmad. I have heard so much about him, and I love him for the sake of Allah. I hear of all the good things that he has done. He is a great teacher and a role model. I would love to meet him someday, insha'Allah." Imam Ahmad was brought to tears. He embraced the baker at once. "Subhanallah, here, Allah has brought me to you, my dear brother. I am Ahmad, brought here dragged by my feet to your humble bakery. If it wasn't for you, this Ahmad could have slept in peace at the masjid. But Allah has fulfilled your dua." Abdul Muizz continued, "Since I first learned this story, I say the tasbih while I am preparing and baking bread. That is the only other ingredient that is different between my bread and your baker's bread." The ruler was greatly affected, and asked to explain the religion of Allah to him, and then he accepted the religion of Islam. Many people followed the king's lead and accepted Islam, but some were not happy. They plotted to get rid of Abdul Muizz, but were addicted to his wonderful bread, and if anything happened to Abdul Muizz, they feared the anger of their fellow men and the king. Gradually all the masjids in town were re-established, and Abdul Muizz was happy to return to Medina having accomplished his task. He smiled as he recalled his mother's advice. "A drop of honey attracts more flies than a gallon of vinegar, and gentleness and sweetness melts more hearts than a preacher's bullhorn."